My name's June Lancaster. I'm Director of Asset Wisdom. And with me today is Greg Markham, who's Head of Estates and Asset Management for Health at Serco. Welcome, Greg. Good to have you with us.
Hi, June.
I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and sharing all your experience with us. To start with, it would be really good to have a sort of background of you and your career to date.
Sure. Started out in the water industry, but then moved on to the NHS. Did 12 years at Bradford. Then moved across to PFI and been in various PFI guises. Then went into the outer private industry, non-healthcare and non-PFI. And now I'm back. So quite a range of experiences, healthcare, PFI, non-PFI and private sector.
So a great deal of experience in PFI and in asset management, I would imagine. What's your experience of asset management?
Initially in the NHS, I now recognise we were doing some asset management, but without calling it that. There was always the capital programme and the backlog maintenance, but not a lot of knowledge and insight to it. That was the biggest change when I moved across to the PFI arena, because obviously the lenders have an asset and they want to make sure that asset is preserved and maintained appropriately. So asset management was front and centre. And some of the terms that I started to learn in PFI, I now understand are asset management terms, but not quite what the NHS would have expected.
Yeah, so your first experience was very much a learning experience, like most experiences are. I think, so when did you really first come across asset management in the real sense of the word? How did you encounter that and develop your knowledge?
Yeah, so 2002 I went across to PFI at Calderdale. There are some NHS specific terms, so capital programme, backlog maintenance, that the NHS are familiar with, but actually there are industry standard terms that the NHS now needs to start to learn and understand. And asset management and asset spend, it's a necessary evil in the NHS, whereas it's a key requirement for the banks to see their investment preserved and maintained.
Yes, so that next thing then's got to be, what's the key lessons that the NHS learn, and how do they engage with professional bodies?
I think they need to engage and reach out to the Institute of Asset Management. I think they need to understand what ISO 55000 is and the principles. Some of it they already do, but there's bits that are significantly missing. And most importantly is that executive engagement. If your Director of Estates is on the board, fine. If your Director of Estates reports to Finance Director, how do you get that message through?
That's a question that's been around a long time.
It is, but I think that's where the ISO 55000 can help, because that starts to train you how you can engage with your C-suite, and just some awareness for your Director of Estates to give to the Director of Finance might be the key to unlocking that. And certainly the whole board should understand what asset management is, because it's their third largest cost. After people and pharmaceuticals, next comes your estate. They need to know the key bits, and it doesn't take a lot to get them in that kind of language.
I suppose the question then is, how do we actually do that? How do we engage that board? How do we support the NHS in actually understanding asset management in more detail? And more importantly, what the benefits of it are?
Yeah, so I think there's lots of good case studies in parallel industries. So all the utility companies use asset management. They're a highly regulated industry with large value assets. I'd say healthcare fits that bill, and they need to start seeing themselves as an asset manager, not just a healthcare provider, which is what they are, but they also need to see that there's an asset management perspective to this. And I think the Institute of Healthcare Engineering and Estate Management, and possibly HEFMA, have a role to play to start raising that awareness. The material's there in the Institute of Asset Management. The NHS needs to wake up to it and see it and start to use it.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I have said before that as a director of nursing, if I'd have understood about asset management what I understand now, which is significantly less than you do, I actually would have probably made some different decisions or had some different conversations with people. So that's definitely true.
It's the age-old, what are capital charges? I've got this new air conditioning unit. What's this capital charge? Well, actually, that's your life cycle cost. So you would call it capital charging in the NHS, but it's life cycle. and that's because you bought the asset, but then you have to keep investing in it so it can be replaced when it's end of life to maintain that facility. And that's the bit that users are missing sometimes.
So terminology is very much a very important part of this process of education, really, and the process of change.
Yeah, and I think that bridge, it would get the NHS to understand actually they do asset management, not holistically, but they do parts of it. And that what they call one thing actually is known as a wider term in the general industry. I've seen defence estates waking up to it, and they're now talking about ISO 55000. The NHS estate surely has to come next. And with the amount of PFI that's going to get handed back over this next term, they're going to get buildings that get handed back with a life cycle plan, an investment plan, an asset management strategy. And I'm not sure they're equipped to take those back without it.
So where do you think the change process starts then?
I think it starts with the directors of estates. We need to raise their awareness. They need to understand that actually this is a tool set that can help them. The most important thing about asset management, there is a bit of a science and a bit of an art combined, but the outcome is it should start to talk to your C-suite in business priorities and investment priorities and consequences of not investing. And that's the key. It's not all about all these wonderful, complicated assets and the nuts and bolts of it. It's plain and simple impact on the business and the bottom line.
Yeah, and I think from my knowledge, it's also about everybody understanding what it is that they offer in terms of asset management. It's not an engineering issue purely. It's what everybody needs to understand what their role is in that process.
Absolutely. One of the biggest learnings as a maintenance provider in the private sector, when we started looking at ISO 55000 or past 55 as it was at the time, we only had an influence over a third of the items as the maintainer of the asset. So then you try and make yourself an asset custodian, but to be the asset owner, there's so much more that needs to be done. But people don't know that because that's typically in your finance directorate, it's in your procurement team, it's at your board level and your director of estates. So if they don't understand that, and that's 2/3 of the whole asset management cycle, it's kind of inevitable it's not going to work properly.
So there's some real challenges ahead for certainly as you talk about PFI, the changes with PFI, there's some real challenges ahead for trusts across the board, really.
Yeah, challenges and opportunities because actually, if you look at the PFI estate, regardless of the politics, it's a well-maintained estate. You've got sites that are 20 plus years old, but they don't look 20 plus years old. They've been invested appropriately over their life. So actually, there's an opportunity for the NHS to learn and understand what the real cost of an estate provision is, and that's where asset management can absolutely help. It's that forward maintenance. If you don't spend next year's capital programme, what are the consequences? Well, in estates, it probably doesn't make an immediate impact. The year after, it kind of starts to make an impact. The year after that, you will see an impact, but then it takes 2 years or more to recover. And look at the NHS right today. The backlog maintenance bill is huge because of that neglect of investment, because they've cut from estates to direct at frontline care, which is understandable, but eventually it all catches up and you have to pay that money somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really good thoughts. Obviously, the professional bodies, IHEM, HEFMA, etc., the IAM have got some role to play in supporting the NHS as it moves forward, and it's a very challenged organisation at the moment, as we all know. But I think there's some real, as you say, opportunities going forward, and it's how we capitalise on those.
Well, the NHS is just about to go through its largest capital investment since PFI. And if they don't adopt asset management tools and techniques now, then they're wasting some of that investment and not aiming it at the correct areas. It's a missed opportunity. Having been both sides, NHS and PFI, sides of the fence, the capital programme is handed down in the NHS as that's your limit, go spend it. And if you don't have to spend it, don't. Whereas actually asset management's all about what do we need to spend to keep this place running and where do we need to prioritise the spend. So not what it looks like as in redecorating, but what's the infrastructure needs. And the infrastructure is so complicated on the acute facility. If you start to grow the site and extra beds and extra mobile units and extra modular builds, can the infrastructure really cope with that? And do you end up with a situation where actually infrastructure can't and it fails, as has been seen over time?
Well, I thank you very much, Greg. I think there's lots of messages in there for the NHS, lots of messages in there for the professionals that are involved in taking the asset management forward within the NHS, and lots of benefits to the NHS in actually doing that. So I think that's a great moment to end.
Absolutely no problem. And like I said, the opportunities there is a threat if they don't do it, but the opportunity to actually bring estates back to the top table where it's not, and people start to understand what its contribution is to patient care and how sustainably it can contribute in the future. That's the key for me, and I'm passionate about it, so hopefully that's come across.
Yeah, it's definitely come across, and I think from my point of view, I would say that education and understanding of what asset management is, as opposed to what people believe it is a key part of the way forward.